The boarding gate at Dallas-Fort Worth International buzzed with the usual hum of travelers shuffling from one life to another. Families corralled children who clutched stuffed animals and spilled snacks. Businessmen leaned against walls, talking loudly into phones, while their laptop bags sagged at their sides. The intercom crackled with final boarding announcements, repeating a tone that had already faded into background noise for most passengers. It was, in every way, an ordinary afternoon for Flight 228 bound for Atlanta. Among the crowd was a woman in her 60s, moving with the kind of deliberate calm that made her seem both unhurried and unbothered. Her boarding pass, when scanned, revealed nothing remarkable, just Passenger 89 in the manifest. She carried a frayed canvas bag slung over one shoulder, its faded green fabric stitched with years of travel and wear. In her other hand, she held a paperback novel, its cover bent and softened by time. Her appearance drew no attention. She wasn't dressed in sharp business attire or glittering jewelry. Her hair, streaked with silver, was tied back in a simple braid. She wore comfortable jeans, sneakers, and a light jacket. To anyone glancing quickly, she was just another grandmother flying home after a visit, another face in the endless churn of America's airports. Yet for those who might have looked closer really looked, there were hints. The way she carried herself was different. Her posture was too straight, too precise, not simply the habit of age, but the muscle memory of decades spent standing at attention. Her eyes, soft and steady, flicked naturally to exits, windows, and movement in the periphery. And pinned discreetly to the strap of her canvas bag was a small golden crest, an insignia of the U.S. Army Signal Corps. To most travelers, it was nothing more than decoration, perhaps a memento from a relative. But to those who knew, it meant something else entirely. The woman walked down the jetway without hesitation, stepping onto the aircraft with a nod to the flight attendant who greeted her. She didn't fumble with her boarding pass, didn't linger in confusion, as others often did. She moved directly to row 17, sliding into a seat near the wing. With practiced ease, she stowed her bag, kept the paperback in hand, and buckled her belt before most passengers had even figured out where their luggage might fit. To the flight attendants, she was efficient and polite, offering a smile but not inviting conversation. To the captain who glanced briefly through the open cockpit door as passengers filed in, she was another traveler boarding his flight. No more, no less. To everyone else, she was invisible in the way older women often are in crowded spaces, shadow that blended into the ordinary rhythm of boarding. But invisibility was something she had cultivated. It was easier that way. Easier than explaining the decades of service, the nights spent listening to radio chatter that meant life or death, the soldiers who depended on her voice when everything around them was falling apart. Easier than carrying the weight of stories she had never shared outside of those who lived them. She preferred it this way, anonymous, unremarkable, another nameless figure in transit. Still, as the plane filled and the boarding door finally shut with a hiss, she allowed herself a moment of reflection. She had flown dozens of times since her retirement, traveling quietly between family gatherings, old friends, and the occasional veterans event when she couldn't refuse the invitation. But today felt different. She couldn't name why. Perhaps it was the A-10s she'd glimpsed on the tarmac earlier, lined up for maneuvers out of a nearby base. Or perhaps it was the restless energy in the air, the unshakable sense that routine was about to fracture. The engines roared to life, shaking the cabin as the aircraft taxied toward the runway. Around her, passengers settled in, children pressed faces to windows. Businessmen tucked laptops away as the flight attendants gave safety demonstrations. She listened quietly, nodding when instructed, though she could recite the speech herself by now. She had heard voices recite protocols far more dire, voices calling for medevacs, for fire support, for extraction. Compared to those, The oxygen mask demonstration was comfortingly simple. As the plane accelerated and lifted into the sky, she closed her eyes briefly, feeling the weight of gravity ease as the ground slipped away. She opened her book but read little, her mind drifting elsewhere. She thought of sandstorms and burning skies. She thought of nights when the only thing standing between soldiers and silence was her calm, unwavering voice guiding them to safety. She thought of friends lost, of missions completed, of the strange emptiness of leaving it all behind. A boy 2 rows up peeked back at her, curious. He couldn't have been older than 10, his sneakers swinging above the floor as he clutched a toy jet in his hand. He stared at her golden pin, puzzled, then offered a shy smile before turning back to his mother. She smiled faintly in return, adjusting her book. No one on that flight knew the full story, not yet. They didn't know that in Iraq, she had once coordinated air cover for trapped infantry, her voice cutting through chaos as artillery rained down. They didn't know that in Afghanistan, she had steadied panicked pilots, guiding them through fog and crossfire. They didn't know the nickname she had earned among soldiers, Eagle Actual, a name spoken with respect and gratitude, passed from one platoon to another like a legend. Now, sitting quietly in row 17, she was just passenger 89. She preferred it that way. But the skies had a way of calling people back, and soon the world would be reminded of the woman behind the call sign. For the moment, though, the cabin was calm. The seatbelt light glowed overhead, engines droned steady, and the world outside stretched in endless blue. She turned a page in her novel, the words blurring as her thoughts drifted again. It had been years since she last touched a radio, years since her voice carried weight beyond casual conversation. Yet she could still feel the headset pressing against her ear, could still hear the clipped urgency of voices relying on her. She wondered if she would ever use that part of herself again. In less than an hour, she would have her answer. The cabin lights flickered as the jetliner pressed higher into the thin air, leaving behind the sprawling patchwork of Texas fields and highways. At first, everything unfolded as any other flight. Children tugged impatiently at seatbelts. Travelers closed their eyes. Business passengers already reopened laptops, as if deadlines waited at cruising altitude. But then, somewhere over Mississippi, the calm broke. A shudder rippled through the fuselage, sudden and violent enough to jolt drinks against tray tables. A gasp rose collectively from passengers, followed by nervous laughter as turbulence was announced over the intercom. The captain's voice, meant to sound reassuring, carried a thin edge of strain. Passenger 89 did not flinch. She had weathered rides far rougher than this, strapped into helicopters that rattled like tin cans over enemy ground. Her fingers curled calmly around the armrest, knuckles pale but steady. Around her, tension surged. People clutched armrests tighter, eyes darting to overhead bins, as if they feared luggage would burst loose. But the turbulence wasn't what unsettled her. It was the flicker of something just outside the oval window. At first, she dismissed it as sunlight glinting off a cloud bank. But then, unmistakably, gray wings slid into formation, low, menacing silhouettes keeping pace with the jetliner. The child 2 rows up saw it too, pressing his toy jet against the glass in delight. "Look, Mommy! Airplanes!" he shouted. His mother's face paled, realizing those weren't ordinary planes. They were A-10 Warthogs, brutal, armored machines built for war. Passengers craned necks toward the windows, whispers spreading like wildfire. Phones angled awkwardly toward the sky. The Warthogs stayed close, steady, and deliberate. To civilians, the sight was terrifying, but to Passenger 89, it stirred something far deeper. The low hum of their engines, the aggressive tilt of their wings, it was all too familiar. The intercom hissed again, this time garbled. The captain's voice fought static, words breaking apart. Escort ceremonial communication interference? The sound dissolved into white noise. The flight attendants exchanged worried glances. One picked up the handset, trying to reach the cockpit. Nothing but static hissed back. Anxiety thickened in the aisle like smoke. Passengers whispered, some pressing prayerful hands together, others muttering theories. Hijacking? Engine failure? An attack? The truth was simpler, yet far more extraordinary. The escort had been planned. The A-10s belonged to a nearby Air National Guard unit conducting maneuvers. When they realized a commercial airliner on their route carried passengers linked to a veterans recognition event in Atlanta, they'd volunteered for a ceremonial flyby. But ceremony required communication, and right now, the captain couldn't get through. In the cockpit, sweat beaded at the captain's brow. He twisted knobs, adjusted frequencies, but the interference crackled relentlessly. His co-pilot muttered under his breath, frustration rising. Without clear communication, coordination with the escort could falter, dangerous at best, disastrous at worst. Meanwhile, in row 17, passenger 89 had not looked away from the warthogs. Their presence didn't alarm her, it steadied her pulse. It was like seeing old comrades arrive on a battlefield, unannounced. Yet the static-filled intercom told her something crucial. The crew couldn't establish contact. And then it happened. A flight attendant, moving briskly down the aisle to calm passengers, noticed her pin. The golden insignia gleamed faintly under the cabin lights, catching his eye. He stopped short, recognition dawning. "Ma'am," he whispered, crouching slightly at her row. "That's you?" He didn't finish the question, but his eyes flicked from her face to the warthogs outside, and back. Her expression didn't change. She simply nodded once, faint but certain. The attendant swallowed, lowering his voice. "The captain can't get comms stable. Do you know radios?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. She hadn't touched a live comm in years. But habits like those weren't forgotten. They live in muscle memory, in reflexes carved by fire. She closed her book gently, set it on the tray table, and answered with the same calm tone she had once used to steady men under fire. "Take me to the cockpit." The attendant blinked, hesitating. He wanted to ask 100 questions. Who she was, what she meant, whether she could really help, but something in her eyes silenced him. It wasn't arrogance. It was certainty. Within minutes, she was ushered forward, the cabin buzzing with curiosity. Passengers tracked her movement, whispers chasing her down the aisle. Some caught sight of the crest pin and murmured recognition. Veterans among them straightened in their seats, saluting discreetly as she passed. The cockpit door opened, and the air inside felt hotter, tighter, charged with frustration. The captain glanced up, irritation flashing, until he saw her insignia. His expression shifted from disbelief to cautious hope. "This interference comms are jammed," he muttered, gesturing at the panel. "We can't get through." She didn't waste time. Sliding into the jump seat, she reached for the headset. Her hands, steady as stone, adjusted the mic with practiced precision. For the briefest moment, she closed her eyes, recalling the thousands of times she had done this before, not in the safety of a pressurized cabin, but in bunkers, shaking under artillery. Then she keyed the mic, her voice cutting through decades of silence. "Hog flight, this is Eagle Actual. Do you copy?" The cockpit stilled. Even the static seemed to hush, as though the air itself recognized the weight of the call sign. Seconds stretched unbearably long. Then, over the radio, a stunned but sharp reply burst through. "Eagle Actual? Hog lead copies you loud and clear." The co-pilot's jaw dropped. The captain's eyes widened. In the skies outside, the formation of warthogs tightened immediately, wings dipping in synchronization. Behind them, in row 17, and throughout the cabin, passengers sat in restless confusion, sensing something monumental was happening just beyond their understanding. Inside the cockpit, however, there was no confusion. The ordinary veneer of passenger 89 had shattered. She wasn't just a retiree with a pin. She was Eagle Actual, and her voice had just reclaimed the sky. The cockpit hummed with tension. The static had been relentless moments ago, but now, the moment her voice pierced the crackle, everything changed. The co-pilot's fingers hovered over knobs, adjusting frequencies almost instinctively, while the captain leaned forward, disbelief etched into his lined face. He had seen many crises in his career, but nothing prepared him for this. A retired passenger suddenly speaking a language he could barely comprehend, yet commanding absolute authority. Hog flight, maintain formation. Adjust heading 0-9-0. Confirm altitude. Maintain 2,000 above our flight level, her voice said, measured, unwavering. Immediately, over the radio, the response came. Strong, clear, and filled with uncontainable reverence. Copy loud and clear. Eagle Actual. Hog flight maintaining formation. The co-pilot froze, staring at her. Is that? He started, voice trailing. The captain raised a hand, silencing him. They both knew the answer, even before she acknowledged the airman over the channel. Passenger 89's hands rested lightly on the edge of the cockpit console. She didn't need to grip controls. Her authority was in her voice. Every syllable carried precision honed through decades of high-stakes coordination. She gave clear, concise orders, altitude adjustments, formation tweaks, bearing confirmations. The A-10s responded instantly, moving with a precision that rivaled the most choreographed dance. Back in the cabin, passengers felt the shift immediately, though most didn't understand the technicalities. There was a tension in the air, electric and palpable. Mothers instinctively held their children closer. Veterans leaned forward in seats, some whispering the words Eagle Actual, mouths barely moving. Phones lifted to capture the moment, but it was the silence that mattered. A silence of recognition, of awe, of witnessing something far beyond the ordinary. Who is that? A young man whispered, leaning toward a woman across the aisle. His voice trembled, half disbelief, half admiration. I think that's her, she replied softly. That woman? The radio operator they call Eagle Actual. Passenger 89 didn't look back. She didn't need to. The radio was her domain, and she had stepped back into it effortlessly. Years of muscle memory guided every breath, every word. Her calm was magnetic. The pilots responded not because they had to, but because they trusted her instinctively. Every adjustment she suggested was executed without question. The warthogs outside weren't mere aircraft. They were instruments, extensions of her command. She could sense the formation's subtle movements, anticipate the responses before the pilot spoke. A minor drift in altitude, a slight misalignment in wing positioning. She corrected it with the ease of someone who had spent nights listening to trembling voices, guiding them through firestorms, through chaos. For the passengers, the experience was surreal. The sky, once a backdrop to their mundane journey, had transformed into a theater of precision and discipline. Ordinary travelers found themselves holding their breath as the planes aligned in formations that seemed impossible, executing maneuvers they had only ever seen in documentaries. The roar of the Warthog engines outside blended with the steady hum of the jetliner, creating a symphony of power and control. Meanwhile, the crew inside the cockpit began to understand the weight of the moment. The captain, experienced in crises ranging from technical failures to unruly passengers, felt the gravity of a different kind of respect. He watched as passenger 89 issued commands, and though she was no longer a soldier, the authority in her voice made the jetliner feel smaller, safer. He marveled silently at the composure she maintained. There was no arrogance, only precision. "She's amazing," the co-pilot whispered. His eyes never left her. He had flown dozens of missions, but never had he witnessed someone command respect with mere words. Passenger 89 kept her focus outward, monitoring the Warthog's response to her instructions. She could feel the tension in their formation, subtle, almost imperceptible shifts. She adjusted, confirming bearings, giving directional tweaks, and coordinating altitude corrections. Every command was measured, never rushed. "Eagle Actual, confirmation on bearing 205, came a pilot's voice, crisp and steady. "Confirmed. Maintain heading 205. Adjust airspeed to 120 knots. Watch for turbulence at our 12 o'clock, she replied. Her voice was calm, yet every syllable carried authority, the kind that demanded obedience without question. The pilot responded immediately, and the formation shifted imperceptibly, like a flock of birds responding to an unseen hand. In the cabin, whispers grew. A few passengers finally realized the significance of her actions. One man, a retired Marine, stood slowly, hand pressed against his chest. His wife leaned on his shoulder, understanding dawning in her eyes. Others followed silent, respectful acknowledgement for the woman who had unknowingly entered their lives as a mere passenger, but had instantly commanded the skies. Some passengers had pulled out phones, trying to record the event, but few captured the essence. The awe, the precision, the history carried in every word, every command that could not be filmed. It had to be felt. The turbulence outside shifted slightly as the Warthogs adjusted their positions. The jetliner rocked gently in response, and a few nervous passengers gripped armrests, fearing that the coordination might falter. But Passenger 89's steady cadence reassured them. Calm but commanding, her voice guided both the escort and the jetliner simultaneously. The cabin, tense just moments before, now hummed with quiet anticipation, as though everyone knew they were witnessing something extraordinary. Her mind drifted briefly to her past. She remembered nights when soldiers had clutched radios like lifelines, eyes wide with fear as explosions shook the ground around them. She had guided them through ambushes, coordinated medevacs under fire, and calmed pilots navigating treacherous skies. And now, decades later, she was back in her element, not in war, but in a ceremonial escort that somehow demanded the same precision, the same authority, the same life-or-death weight. Yet unlike before, this time, lives were not at stake in the same direct way. Civilians were aboard, not soldiers in combat zones. But the stakes were still real, the responsibility of coordinating with armored attack planes, the chance that a misstep could endanger everyone on the jetliner. Her hands did not tremble. She had been trained for far more chaotic moments than this. She gave another set of instructions, guiding the formation closer, tightening the alignment, and coordinating with the captain to ensure the jetliner's safety. The pilots outside responded instantly, moving in perfect synchrony, their A-10s glinting in the sunlight as though the sky itself bent to her command. Passengers felt the awe deepen. Mothers whispered, children watched with wide eyes, and veterans murmured their recognition under their breath. Some wondered how a mere passenger could wield such influence. They didn't know her story, but instinctively they understood its weight. As the minutes stretched, it became clear that Passenger 89 had transformed the flight into something extraordinary. She was no longer an ordinary woman, no longer Passenger 89. She was Eagle Actual, the same voice that had once guided soldiers through war zones, now commanding respect and obedience from fighter pilots hundreds of feet above the ground. And the cabin, for all its ordinary passengers, had become part of history. Her eyes flicked briefly to the child up front, who was still staring at her with fascination. She offered a small, reassuring smile, letting him know that yes, everything was under control. No panic, no fear, just calm, authority, and precision, carried effortlessly by a voice that had saved lives more times than she could count. The co-pilot leaned forward, whispering to the captain, "She's unreal. I've never seen anything like this." The captain nodded, eyes fixed on the instruments, trying to process both the technical brilliance of the operation and the human story unfolding before him. This was more than a flight. It was a masterclass in leadership, courage, and composure, delivered without fanfare. Passenger 89's hands rested lightly on the console. She didn't touch anything she didn't need to. She didn't rush. Every word, every command flowed naturally, as though decades of experience had distilled into this single perfect moment. And outside, the A-10s responded without hesitation, their formation flawless, obedient, almost reverent. The transformation was complete. Passenger 89 was no longer just a woman quietly sitting in row 17. She had reclaimed her authority, reminded the skies of her presence, and turned an ordinary flight into a spectacle of control, precision, and awe. The cabin, passengers, and crew alike all bore witness. And for those few minutes, the world outside the window ceased to exist, leaving only the extraordinary reality that one voice call, commanding and indelibly trained in crisis, could change everything. The roar of the A-10 engines outside was deafening, a low, vibrating hum that filled the sky with authority. The pilots weren't rookies. They were hardened veterans, many of them raised on stories of a voice that had once guided troops through enemy fire. And now, through the haze of static and distance, that voice returned, clear and commanding. Hog lead copies loud and clear, came the voice of the formation leader, gruff, experienced, carrying both disbelief and awe. "Eagle Actual, we never thought we'd fly under your guidance again." Passenger 89, seated at the cockpit console, didn't flinch. She didn't need to. She was no stranger to recognition. She had heard it countless times under far more dangerous circumstances. What mattered was control, clarity, precision. The pilots outside were professionals. Her voice would make them even better. "Maintain formation tight," she instructed, her tone crisp but calm. "Adjust airspeed to 125 knots. Altitude remains at 2,000 feet above our flight level. Watch for turbulence at the 3 o'clock and 12 o'clock positions. Confirm visual on the aircraft directly below us." "Copy, Eagle Actual," the lead pilot responded. The rest of the formation echoed, their synchronization immediate. Inside the cockpit, the airline crew watched, almost paralyzed by disbelief. The co-pilot leaned forward, eyes wide. She's controlling them," he muttered. His voice trembled with a mix of fear and awe. "A passenger is controlling A-10s." The captain shook his head, his mind struggling to reconcile the ordinary woman in the jump seat with the authority she wielded. "Not just controlling them," he murmured. "Guiding them, like a commander on a battlefield." Outside, the warthogs responded like extensions of her mind. Wings dipped, engines adjusted, formation tightened and shifted, all at her verbal command. Decades of experience had honed her instincts into an almost superhuman precision. Each pilot knew instinctively what to do, how to adjust. They didn't question. They obeyed, moved, adapted, and thrived under the guidance of a voice that had once saved lives countless times over. In the cabin, passengers were no longer murmuring in fear. They were leaning forward in wonder. Veterans' eyes widened in recognition. Some whispered among themselves, trying to piece together what they knew from old stories. Mothers held children closer, but it wasn't fear that made their palms sweat. It was reverence. Everyone instinctively understood that what was happening was extraordinary. A Marine leaned toward his son, voice low and trembling. That's her. That's Eagle Actual. She guided my platoon home in Iraq. The boy's eyes widened, looking between the woman and the sky outside. She saved people? Yes, the father whispered. Many people. The roar of engines outside was like a heartbeat thundering alive. Passenger 89's eyes remained fixed on the flight instruments and the external viewports. She adjusted headings, called out corrections, and her calm authority never wavered. Every transmission was precise, measured, and intentional. She didn't overcompensate. She didn't rush. Every word had a weight that could not be ignored. Hog lead, adjust bearing 085. Maintain 2000 above our flight level. Confirm visual on all units, she instructed, voice steady and unwavering. Confirmed, Eagle Actual, the formation leader replied, all lacing each word. The A-10s shifted instantly, wings dipping in perfect synchrony. Back in the cabin, whispers turned into murmurs of admiration. A retired veteran standing near the window pressed his hand against his chest. His wife leaned on his shoulder, tears welling in her eyes. Do you see what she's doing? She asked softly. She's guiding them. She's saving them. A young couple leaned toward each other, captivated. Who is she? The woman whispered. How can a passenger do that? She's more than a passenger, her partner replied quietly. She's a hero. Passenger 89 had been trained for this. She could read radio signals like a book, anticipate pilot adjustments, and calculate airspeed, bearing, and altitude faster than most could process numbers. But her training went beyond technical skill. It was instinct, intuition, experience forged in fire and blood. Every decision, every word, carried authority not because she demanded it, but because it was earned. The turbulence outside shifted slightly as the formation adjusted. The jetliner rocked in response, prompting some passengers to clutch armrests, but she remained calm. Calmness radiated from her like a magnetic field, and it was contagious. Even the captain felt it, a steadying reassurance that all was under control. Maintain visual on the lead, she instructed. No deviations. We fly as one unit. Adjust speed to match Hog Flight 3. Ensure all movements are synchronized. We cannot afford misalignment. The A-10s moved flawlessly, as if anticipating her words before she spoke. Each pilot felt a sense of respect, of loyalty, of deep recognition. They had trained under her voice in stories, in simulations, in memory, but this was real. The voice they revered was alive, commanding, unmistakable. In the cabin, the tension had transformed into a reverent silence. Passengers leaned forward, captivated by an event they didn't fully understand, but felt with their entire being. The roar of engines, the precise dance of the A-10s, and the serene authority of Passenger 89 combined to create a spectacle unlike anything they had ever witnessed. She thought briefly of the past, of nights spent listening to radios crackle under mortar fire, of soldiers' voices trembling with fear, of pilots navigating deadly skies. And now, decades later, she was back, not in a war zone, but commanding the sky in a ceremonial escort that demanded the same focus, the same precision, the same level of responsibility. Eagle Actual, confirmation on bearing 110, came the lead pilot. Confirmed. Maintain 110. Adjust altitude as necessary for turbulence. Keep formation tight, she replied. Every word was deliberate. Every instruction executed with precision. For the passengers, the ordinary flight had transformed into a front-row seat to history. Ordinary people, who had expected nothing more than a routine journey, now witnessed the convergence of skill, experience, and courage. The realization dawned slowly. They were witnessing a living legend, a woman whose actions had saved countless lives. And now, even in peacetime skies, her command was undeniable. The co-pilot shook his head, voice low but awed. "I've flown jets, helicopters, small planes, but I've never seen someone command authority like this." "A passenger." His words trailed off. Passenger 89 remained focused outward, ignoring the admiration. She had a job to do, and she did it with perfection. The formation outside adjusted once more, tighter, more synchronized. The jetliner responded to the smallest adjustments. Inside the cockpit, the airline crew realized that what they were witnessing was more than skill. It was a presence, a command, a return of a legend. In the cabin, the veteran whispered to his son, "Do you understand? She's guided soldiers through death itself. And now, she's guiding planes hundreds of feet above the ground." The child nodded solemnly, understanding only in part, yet feeling the gravity of the moment. Around them, passengers continued to watch, captivated, humbled, and inspired. And through it all, Passenger 89, Eagle Actual, remained calm. She issued instructions with precision, corrected deviations, anticipated turbulence, and maintained the delicate balance between ceremonial escort and civilian flight. Her authority wasn't loud or flashy. It was quiet, commanding, and absolute. In that moment, the ordinary world outside the jetliner, the highways, the fields, the clouds disappeared. Only the sky, the planes, and her voice existed. And everyone aboard, from passengers to crew, from veterans to children, felt it, the presence of a hero, unseen for decades, suddenly returning to remind the world of her power, her skill, and her unwavering calm under pressure. Passenger 89 glanced briefly out the window, eyes tracking the warthogs, then back to the instruments. Every decision, every command, was intentional. And as she guided the escort through precise adjustments, the realization crystallized. She had never truly left the battlefield. The battlefield had simply changed. Now, the stakes were different, but the responsibility remained. And everyone aboard felt it. The cabin had settled into a strange rhythm, an uneasy quiet, punctuated only by the hum of engines and the occasional radio chatter outside. Passengers were no longer murmuring nervously about turbulence. Their attention had shifted, wholly captivated by something larger, something almost impossible to comprehend. Some had begun to piece together the fragments of the story, the insignia pin, the calm authority with which Passenger 89 had taken the headset, the flawless coordination of the A-10 escort outside. Slowly, understanding dawned on a few. This was not an ordinary traveler. She was not Passenger 89. She was Eagle Actual. A retired Marine, seated by a window, clenched his hands together. His eyes followed every movement of the escort outside, wings dipping and engines roaring. "That's her," he whispered to his wife, voice trembling. "She guided my platoon through hell itself. And now, she's doing it again." His wife swallowed, unsure whether to be fearful or awestruck. She turned to see the woman at the cockpit console, calm, focused, serene in the eye of this metaphorical storm. The veteran's fingers pressed against his chest, as though the presence of Eagle Actual could still protect them. Decades later, around them, whispers spread like wildfire. Passengers leaned forward, craning their necks to glimpse her. A young boy pressed his toy jet against the window, wide-eyed. "Mommy, look, she's flying the other planes." His mother squeezed his hand, overwhelmed with the realization that this was no play. Flight attendants, trained for emergencies, but never for something like this, moved quietly down the aisles, whispering updates to passengers. No one panicked. There was no fear, only reverent curiosity. Even the flight crew could feel it, the presence of a legend who had returned to remind the world of her command, her authority, and her composure under pressure. Inside the cockpit, passenger 89 maintained a steady rhythm. She spoke with clarity, precision, and authority, issuing commands that coordinated the movements of the escort with a skill that left the pilots outside awestruck. Every adjustment she suggested, bearing corrections, altitude tweaks, formation shifts, was executed immediately and flawlessly. Her years of experience shone through. "Eagle Actual, confirming bearing 095, said the lead pilot, voice reverent, almost shaken by the gravity of the moment. "Confirmed," she replied. "Maintain formation tight. Watch 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock positions for turbulence. Adjust speed to 128 knots. Keep alignment precise." Immediately, the formation shifted as if in response to a single thought. Outside, the A-10s glinted in the sunlight, their armored wings slicing through the clouds with perfect synchronization. The airliner rocked gently with each adjustment, but inside, the passengers were mesmerized. They could feel the authority emanating from the woman in the jump seat, even if they didn't understand her language. Her words carried weight, commanding the aircraft outside while simultaneously reassuring the pilots inside. This was more than skill. It was presence. It was command that transcended decades, experience, and even the ordinary expectations of civilians. The young boy whispered again, gripping his mother's arm. She's like a superhero." In a sense, he wasn't wrong. The calm that radiated from passenger 89, the precision with which she orchestrated a dozen moving machines in the sky, was nothing short of extraordinary. But she didn't see herself as a superhero. She saw herself as someone who had been trained for this, who had faced chaos and survived, and who now, in a civilian sky, could once again exercise that skill. Veterans around the cabin nodded quietly, their expressions a mixture of reverence and gratitude. Some pressed fingers to their lips in silent salutes. Others stared at her with misting eyes, remembering battles fought decades ago, the voices that had relied on hers, and the lives saved under her calm guidance. Meanwhile, turbulence shifted again, stronger this time, rippling through the cabin. Some passengers gripped armrests, hearts racing. But passenger 89 did not falter. Her eyes, steady as ever, scanned instruments and windows. She assessed the Warthog's response, the jetliner's stability, and the minute adjustments needed to maintain perfect formation. Hog lead, maintain heading 088. Adjust airspeed to 130 knots. Correct minor drift in formation 3. Confirm visual on Hog 4 and 5, she instructed. Immediately, the pilots outside responded. Wings dipped, engines adjusted, and the formation corrected with flawless precision. The roar of turbines, once intimidating, became a symphony of coordination, echoing her authority. Passengers pressed closer to windows, mesmerized by the perfect alignment of the A-10s. Phones lifted hesitantly to capture the moment, but those aboard realized quickly that no image could convey the true scale, the weight of history, skill, and heroism embodied in a single woman at the cockpit console. A mother whispered to her husband, voice barely audible, "Do you see? That woman? She saved lives, and now she's saving us in a different way. Even if we don't understand it, she's in control." Even the captain felt it. He had flown thousands of hours in turbulent skies, faced technical malfunctions, and dealt with panicked passengers. But this was different. The ordinary laws of aviation had met extraordinary human command, and the result was nothing short of miraculous. Passenger 89's eyes flicked to the child up front, who had been watching with wide-eyed wonder. She offered a small, reassuring smile. Even in the midst of chaos, she acknowledged him, quietly letting him know that, yes, she had everything under control. There was calmness in that gesture, a silent reassurance that her authority extended to everyone aboard. The warthogs adjusted again, tighter this time, responding to subtle commands that passengers couldn't fully perceive. The young boy leaned forward, mouth agape. "Mommy, she's controlling them. She's really controlling them." "Yes," the mother whispered, overwhelmed. "She's..." Amazing. Passenger 89's mind, meanwhile, was fully engaged. Years of training had prepared her for this. Every instruction, every adjustment, every assessment was executed with clarity and precision. She anticipated shifts in turbulence, corrected alignment issues, and guided the escort with a calm authority that left the pilots outside and the crew inside in awe. Hog lead, maintain formation tight. Correct Hog 3's drift. Altitude check, maintain safe separation from cloud turbulence, she commanded, her voice steady, deliberate, and unyielding. The formation outside adjusted instantly. The airliner rocked gently, but inside, passengers no longer feared. They were transfixed, realizing that they were witnessing history-ordinary people experiencing the extraordinary. Veterans in the cabin whispered among themselves, sharing fragments of stories they had heard in barracks decades ago. They recognized her voice from tales of precision, calm, and life-saving skill. For many, the moment was overwhelming proof that legends didn't vanish, they merely waited. Passenger 89 guided the formation with flawless authority, weaving together decades of experience into every transmission. She didn't rush. She didn't panic. Every adjustment was precise, perfect, deliberate. She was a master orchestrating a complex ballet in the sky, commanding armored jets with nothing more than her voice and her presence. The passengers, flight crew, and even the pilots outside felt it the sheer weight of her skill, her experience, and her calmness under pressure. And in that moment, the ordinary journey of Flight 228 transformed into a display of precision, reverence, and heroism that none aboard would ever forget. The hum of the jetliner's engines was steady, but the cabin felt charged with anticipation. Outside, the A-10 formation held just beyond the wingspan of the airliner, engines thundering, metal glinting in the sunlight. Every pilot in the escort was aware that they weren't just flying alongside another aircraft. They were about to perform a salute for someone whose reputation had been whispered in hangars and barracks for decades. Inside, Passenger 89 adjusted the headset slightly, her fingers brushing against the controls instinctively. She had done this countless times before, though never quite like this. The stakes were different. This wasn't a war zone. No lives were in immediate danger. And yet, the weight of responsibility was no less tangible. She felt it in her chest, in the tightening of muscles, in the subtle awareness that every word she spoke now would be executed by aircraft engineered for precision and destruction. "Hog flight," she said over the headset, her voice calm, unwavering. "We are approaching position. Prepare for ceremonial salute. Maintain altitude and alignment. Adjust airspeed to 130 knots. Visual check on all units. Confirm readiness." "Copy, Eagle Actual," the lead pilot replied, voice tight with respect. "All units visual. Ready to execute." The co-pilot glanced at the captain, who nodded slowly. "I've seen a lot in my career," the captain muttered under his breath, "but nothing like this." Passenger 89's eyes flicked to the instruments, then to the window. She could see every movement of the A-10s, every adjustment in formation. They were perfectly synchronized, responding to her verbal instructions, as if she were a conductor leading a symphony of metal and power. The cabin had grown quiet. Passengers leaned forward, sensing that something extraordinary was about to occur. Veterans, already tense with recognition, pressed fingers to their lips, silent salutes. Children clutched toys, mimicking the disciplined attention of adults. The young boy near the front whispered again, clutching his mother's hand. "Mommy." She's really doing it. Yes, she whispered back, though not to him, but to herself. She adjusted the headset, scanning the formation for the final time. Confirm visual hog 1 through 4. Maintain type formation. Execute salute on my command. The A-10 responded, wings dipping slightly in preparation, engines throttling in unison. Every pilot in the formation felt the reverence in her voice, the authority that transcended rank or experience. They had followed her directions under far more perilous circumstances, but this was ceremonial, a tribute, yet the same precision applied. The memory of past missions, of lives saved under her guidance, lent the moment a weight far greater than any routine display. Inside the cabin, whispers and glances traveled like wildfire. Flight attendants exchanged quiet nods, unsure if they were witnessing a real-life legend or a cinematic miracle. Passengers craned their necks toward the windows, captivated by the armored planes perfectly aligned beside them. Veterans held their hands over their hearts, some pressing fingertips against the insignia of medals long since earned. Passenger 89's voice sliced through the air again, precise, commanding. Execute salute. Wing dip at 90 degrees. Hold for 3 seconds. Maintain formation. Commence now. Outside, the warthogs responded instantly. In perfect unison, the pilots dipped their wings in a flawless arc, each motion executed with military precision honed over decades of training. The sun caught the edges of the planes, glinting against armored metal, as if the sky itself were paying tribute. Inside the cabin, a collective gasp rose. Some passengers rose to their feet instinctively. The retired Marine pressed his hand to his chest, saluting quietly. His wife whispered through tears, "She's incredible. She's guiding them, even now." The young boy shouted, unable to contain himself. Look at them. They're saluting her." Passenger 89's eyes glistened briefly. She had never sought recognition, never craved attention. Duty had always been enough. Yet, watching the salute unfold outside, she felt a flicker of emotion she hadn't expected. The pilots, trained for combat and precision, were honoring her in a silent, unmistakable way. The moment was ephemeral, but its weight was profound. She guided the formation through the final adjustments, keeping the wings aligned, ensuring that the salute would be executed flawlessly until the last second. Every second mattered. Any deviation would diminish the precision of the gesture. Her voice remained calm, smooth, almost soothing in its authority. The lead pilot broke radio silence briefly. "Eagle Actual. It's perfect. Beautiful. Thank you." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Maintain formation until clear. Ensure separation before resuming standard flight." Passengers watched, spellbound, as the A-10s leveled wings and resumed their positions alongside the airliner. The roar of engines filled the cabin, a symphony of power and discipline. Some cried quietly. Others whispered silent thanks. The young boy clutched his mother's hand tightly, awestruck. A veteran leaned forward, shaking slightly. She's still the same. Calm, precise. A hero. She always was." The captain exhaled audibly, relief and awe mingling in equal measure. He had witnessed emergencies, turbulence, mechanical failures, but never a moment like this. The combination of precision, authority, and human emotion created an atmosphere that was both exhilarating and humbling. Passenger 89 leaned back slightly, scanning instruments and windows one final time. The ceremonial moment had passed, but its significance lingered in the cabin, in the pilot's formation, and in the hearts of every passenger. She had guided, commanded, and orchestrated with precision, proving that her skill had not faded with time. Outside, the A-10s banked gently, moving away in perfect formation, engines roaring in a final salute. The sky seemed to hold its breath, an exhale as the planes disappeared toward the horizon. Inside the cabin, applause broke out softly at first, then grew louder. Flight attendants clapped, some wiping tears from their eyes. Veterans stood, saluting the woman who had once guided soldiers to safety and had now commanded the sky with flawless authority. The young boy looked up at passenger 89, eyes wide. "Did you see that?" he asked breathlessly. "They saluted you." She offered a small, modest smile, shaking her head. "They weren't saluting me," she whispered, voice soft. "They were honoring duty. And those who serve." The captain turned toward her, still in awe. "I don't know what to say," he murmured. You saved this flight from panic, from confusion. You coordinated a formation of A-10s flawlessly. I've never seen anything like it." Passenger 89 adjusted her bag, her face calm and serene. "I only did what needed to be done," she said simply. "It's not about me. It's about those who trust you and the responsibility you carry." The cabin gradually settled. Passengers resumed seats, but the energy lingered, a mixture of awe, respect, and quiet inspiration. Mothers hugged children tighter, veterans pressed hands to medals, and civilians whispered among themselves, marveling at the extraordinary events they had witnessed. Outside, the sky returned to its ordinary expanse of blue. But inside the cabin, Flight 228 carried a different air, one charged with reverence, recognition, and the quiet echo of a legend. Passenger 89 had returned, if only for a moment, to remind the world that skill, courage, and calm authority never fade. They endure. And in that brief, perfect convergence of ordinary flight and extraordinary history, every passenger knew they had witnessed something rare, remarkable, and unforgettable. The cabin had quieted after the ceremonial salute. The roar of the A-10s faded as the escort returned to base, leaving Flight 228 alone in the expansive blue sky. Yet the air inside remained electric, charged with awe and reflection. The ordinary hum of pressurized engines and ventilation fans could no longer mask the extraordinary imprint of the past hour. Passengers leaned back in their seats, some staring out the windows, as if the sky itself had shifted in significance. The young boy, still wide-eyed, held his toy jet close, whispering to his mother, "Mommy, she really did that. She's amazing." His mother squeezed his hand, her mind racing to reconcile the mundane reality of a commercial flight with the surreal display they had just witnessed. Veterans sat quietly, eyes moist with unspoken emotion. A retired Marine tapped the insignia on his chest lightly, tracing it with a finger as he murmured prayers of gratitude. He wasn't praying for survival anymore. He was praying silently for acknowledgement of a life spent in service, for the recognition that this woman, who had once saved his platoon in the chaos of distant battlefields, had not lost her essence, her authority, her courage. Passenger 89 sat upright in the jump seat, adjusting her bag with a calm, practiced motion. Her face bore no outward trace of pride, no need for applause. She had done what she had trained to do, what she had always done, guided, commanded, and ensured the safety of those who depended on her, whether in war or peace. She allowed herself a brief glance around the cabin. She caught fleeting expressions, wide-eyed astonishment, quiet reverence, subtle salutes from veterans who recognized a kindred spirit. The captain broke the silence, his voice carrying over the cabin intercom softly. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've just experienced something extraordinary. Flight 228 has been escorted by a 1OS under the guidance of a very special passenger, someone whose service and skill are legendary. We thank you for your attention, patience, and..." There were muted claps, some hesitant at first, then spreading slowly as passengers processed the announcement. The young boy laughed softly, clapping his hands together. A few veterans nodded firmly, saluting subtly in the aisle. Even passengers who had no concept of military operations could feel the magnitude of what had just occurred. Passenger 89 closed her eyes for a brief moment, letting herself breathe. She had spent a lifetime in the background, guiding others through chaos, never seeking recognition. And yet, here she was, acknowledged, even silently, by dozens of people who had witnessed her command of the skies. She allowed a fleeting smile. Not for herself, but for those who had trusted her voice in the past, for those pilots who had followed her commands without hesitation, and for the passengers who had just glimpsed a legend in action. The co-pilot leaned toward the captain, whispering in disbelief. "I've flown thousands of miles, managed emergencies I never thought I'd survive. And yet, nothing compares to this." A passenger guided by decades of experience just orchestrated a formation of A-10s flawlessly. I can't even put it into words." The captain nodded slowly. "She didn't just guide them," he said, voice low. "She inspired them. And she inspired all of us. Even the passengers. You could feel it. Every command, every word precision, authority, and calm. It's humbling." Around them, passengers were quietly talking among themselves. Conversations buzzed with awe and speculation. Some were trying to piece together the woman's identity. Others were sharing their emotional responses. The young boy's father whispered to him, "Do you understand? That woman? She saved people. Not today, but she's done it countless times. And now, she guided the skies, right above us." The child nodded solemnly, absorbing a concept larger than he could fully grasp, yet sensing its gravity. "Wow," he whispered. "She's amazing." Flight attendants circulated again, checking on passengers, offering water, and quietly smiling. They had seen emergencies before, turbulence, even unruly passengers, but nothing had prepared them for witnessing history firsthand. The calm authority of Passenger 89, paired with the precision of the A-10 pilots, had transformed an ordinary flight into something deeply personal, inspiring, and unforgettable. Passenger 89 leaned back in her seat slightly, gazing out the window. The sky stretched endlessly, serene and indifferent, yet she knew how much had changed within it for a few short minutes. She reflected briefly on her past, the nights spent in makeshift command centers, the sleepless hours coordinating medevacs, the moments when a single instruction could mean the difference between life and death. Each mission, each voice through the static-laced radio, had led her to this precise calm. Now, she allowed herself to think about anonymity. She had spent decades blending into the background, serving without fanfare, leading without recognition. And yet, the small, reverent gestures from passengers and the flawless response from the A-10 pilots had reminded her of the quiet power of experience and courage. One did not seek accolades. They came, sometimes unexpectedly, and always humbly. The plane began its gradual descent toward Atlanta. Instruments chimed softly as the autopilot managed adjustments, but Passenger 89's presence remained palpable. She observed every detail, aware that even in routine moments, vigilance mattered. Every pilot she had once guided knew her voice. Every soldier she had saved remembered it. And now, even the civilians aboard Flight 228 had felt its power. Veterans in the cabin whispered stories to each other quietly, sharing memories of missions, medevacs, and the calm guidance of Eagle Actual. A retired sergeant pressed his hand to his chest, recalling a night decades ago when her voice had brought his squad safely through a perilous ambush. Beside him, a young man shook his head in wonder, amazed by the convergence of past and present, an ordinary flight suddenly transformed by history and heroism. Flight attendants moved with a quiet respect, offering assistance when needed, but largely giving space to the emotional gravity unfolding in the cabin. Some passengers had tears in their eyes, others were silent, overwhelmed by the realization that they had borne witness to an extraordinary act. Conversations hummed with awe, not fear. They were speaking of courage, of duty, of humility, and of skill beyond ordinary comprehension. Passenger 89 allowed herself a subtle smile as she watched the reactions. She had never sought recognition, yet she understood the value of it in moments like these, not for herself, but for those who remembered, those who needed a reminder of what service, calm authority, and courage could accomplish. Her life had always been about enabling others to succeed, to survive, to endure. Today, that principle had not changed. The young boy leaned forward again, whispering to his mother, "Mommy, she's still amazing. Even now, she's just calm. She knows what she's doing." His mother nodded, swallowing hard, overwhelmed by the quiet magnitude of what they had witnessed. Passenger 89 returned her gaze to the window. Atlanta lay ahead, sprawling beneath the descending clouds. Below, the city was unaware of the small history being made above it. The ordinary world had continued, indifferent to the extraordinary event unfolding in the sky. And yet, for those aboard Flight 228, the memory would endure forever. The captain, glancing at her with respect, spoke quietly. "You handled everything flawlessly. The passengers, the pilots, the entire flight. I don't know how to thank you." She shook her head gently. "It's not about thanks. It's about responsibility. About doing what must be done. That never changes." The co-pilot nodded, his eyes wide with awe. "I don't think any of us will ever forget this," he whispered. Passengers leaned back, some whispering to one another, others silently absorbing the weight of the moment. The sky outside was calm, serene, yet the experience within the cabin had transformed everyone present. A hero had returned, even briefly, to remind them all of courage, precision, and calm authority. As the plane continued its descent, Passenger 89 settled back, her composure impeccable. She had guided the escort, orchestrated a ceremonial salute, and inspired everyone aboard. Yet she remained humble, quiet, and aware. Her life had always been about others, and even now she felt the weight of that principle quietly, humbly, deeply. The young boy looked at her once more, wide-eyed. "Will she always be like that?" he asked softly. "Yes," his mother whispered, squeezing his hand. "She always will." And in that quiet understanding, Flight 228 carried onward, descending toward Atlanta, filled with passengers who had glimpsed history, courage, and the quiet power of one extraordinary woman who had, for a moment, transformed the skies and their hearts forever. The city of Atlanta stretched below, sprawling in a mosaic of streets, parks, and buildings, indifferent to the extraordinary events unfolding high above. Inside Flight 228, the atmosphere was one of quiet anticipation. Passengers shifted in their seats, eyes occasionally flicking toward the windows, toward the sky that had moments ago been dominated by a small formation of gleaming A-10s. For them, the ordinary had become unforgettable. Passenger 89, still seated in the jump seat, adjusted her bag and observed the cabin with quiet awareness. She had spent the last hour orchestrating precision, commanding respect, and ensuring that history, even if only briefly, had honored duty and courage. And now, as the jetliner began its descent into Atlanta's airport, she allowed herself a brief exhale, a fleeting moment of reflection. The captain's voice came over the intercom, steady and respectful. "Ladies and gentlemen, Flight 228 is preparing for landing. We are on schedule and on course. I want to thank you for your attention during what I can only describe as an extraordinary series of events. You have witnessed history today, guided by one of the most remarkable individuals to serve in our armed forces. A murmur of recognition and awe spread throughout the cabin. Passengers whispered to each other, sharing fragments of understanding. Some had researched Eagle Actual before the flight. Others only recognized her authority instinctively. But all were united in a profound respect for the woman whose voice had guided not just pilots, but their own hearts through a surreal experience. The young boy, still clutching his toy jet, turned toward his mother, eyes wide. "Mommy, she really did all of that. She's amazing." "Yes," she replied softly, tears welling. "She's extraordinary. And she didn't do it for anyone to notice. She did it because it was necessary." Veterans nodded quietly, some pressing fingers to medals worn decades ago. Others offered subtle salutes to Passenger 89, a silent acknowledgement of the lives she had saved, the guidance she had provided, and the calm authority she had displayed. Her presence had reminded them of courage, discipline, and the quiet power of experience. Passenger 89 allowed herself a moment to think of the countless voices she had heard over radios in distant lands, of lives saved and missions completed. None of those moments had sought recognition, and neither did this. Yet she could feel, even now, the impact of her actions on those around her. The passengers' awe, the veterans' silent salutes, the pilot's respect, these were the echoes of a life devoted to duty. The descent continued smoothly. Atlanta's skyline emerged through the clouds, glass towers catching the afternoon sunlight. Below, ordinary traffic moved along roads, unaware that above them, history had brushed briefly against the sky. The ordinary city seemed almost oblivious to the extraordinary precision and heroism that had just occurred above it. The landing was smooth, executed flawlessly by the captain, whose earlier concern and awe had given way to a quiet confidence. As the wheels touched the tarmac and the brakes hissed, passengers released breaths they hadn't realized they'd been holding. The applause was soft but genuine, a mixture of relief, admiration, and gratitude. Flight attendants moved through the aisles, checking on passengers with quiet smiles. Some whispered words of wonder. "Did you see that? She really did all of that." Others shook their heads, still processing the weight of the ceremonial salute and the presence of Eagle Actual. Even crew members who had faced countless emergencies were awestruck, silently recognizing the rare combination of skill, authority, and humility that Passenger 89 embodied. The veterans stood, offering quiet salutes. The retired Marine pressed a hand over his heart, his eyes glistening. "She saved us all in different ways," he murmured to his wife. "She guided pilots. She guided us. That woman? She is extraordinary." Passenger 89 stood slowly, moving toward the exit with quiet composure. There was no flourish, no gesture for recognition. She walked as she always had, calm, purposeful, aware of her surroundings, yet fully centered in herself. Every passenger who glimpsed her felt the weight of her presence, even if only for a brief instant. The young boy craned his neck as she passed, whispering, "She's amazing." She offered him a small, reassuring smile, the kind that conveyed more than words could: courage, calm, and a silent acknowledgement of duty well done. Outside, the tarmac was busy with routine arrivals and departures. But for those who had witnessed the escort, the ceremonial salute, and the flawless coordination, the moment lingered. The sky was once again ordinary, but its meaning had changed for the passengers aboard Flight 228. They had glimpsed history, heroism, and a mastery of calm under pressure that few would ever forget. As she moved through the terminal, Passenger 89 reflected briefly on the journey. Duty had always been her guiding principle. Recognition was rare, often unspoken. And yet, the subtle acknowledgments veterans' salutes, passengers' awe, pilots' respect reminded her that quiet courage left lasting echoes, even decades later. Some passengers lingered near the gate, hesitant to step away from the woman who had turned a simple flight into a living testament to skill, precision, and heroism. A retired pilot approached, offering a subtle nod and a small, grateful smile. "Thank you," he said softly. "You reminded me why I chose this path." Passenger 89 nodded, accepting the gesture without fanfare. "It's never about me," she replied quietly. "It's about responsibility and the people who trust you." Families gathered their belongings, exchanging hushed reflections. "Did you see that?" one passenger asked another. "The planes, the salute, the calm she had. Incredible." "Yes," another replied. "She didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to command with fear. She just guided." And everyone followed, even the pilots. As the crowd of passengers and crew dispersed into the terminal, the story of Flight 228 began to take shape in hushed conversations, in emails and texts sent to friends and family, and in social media posts capturing glimpses of the extraordinary event. But no picture could truly convey the weight of her authority, the calm precision, or the subtle heroism that had unfolded above the clouds. Passenger 89 moved quietly, blending into the flow of travelers, her presence no longer commanding the sky, but still resonant in the hearts of those who had witnessed her skill. She carried herself with the same humility and grace she had always possessed, aware that true heroism rarely required applause, but rather the quiet fulfillment of duty. A few passengers paused to watch her leave. Veterans offered subtle nods, some removing hats in silent salute. Children waved timidly, recognizing something remarkable, even if they could not fully comprehend it. Every gaze that followed her departure carried respect, admiration, and a lingering sense of awe. She stepped into the sunlight, leaving the terminal behind, her figure calm, poised, and resolute. The city continued its rhythm, oblivious to the extraordinary woman who had briefly transformed the sky above it. Yet for those aboard Flight 228, and for the pilots who had followed her voice, the memory would endure, etched in the collective consciousness like a silent monument to courage, precision, and authority. Passenger 89 paused briefly, looking back toward the terminal. She smiled faintly, not for recognition, but for the unspoken understanding she had shared with the pilots, the veterans, and the passengers. The sky had been her canvas, and she had painted it with skill, calm, and unwavering precision. The salute had been executed. History had been honored. And she had returned, even briefly, to remind the world that true heroism endured quietly, humbly, and with unwavering responsibility. She moved on, unnoticed by most, yet unforgettable to all who had witnessed her presence. The ordinary flight had ended, but the extraordinary story would live on, in hearts, in whispers, and in the quiet acknowledgement of a hero who had returned, just long enough to command the sky, honor duty, and leave a lasting legacy of courage and calm authority. And as Atlanta sprawled beneath her, Passenger 89 walked away, a legend invisible to the city, but indelibly etched in the lives of those who had seen history unfold above the clouds.